The U.S. Agriculture Secretary met Governor Abbott today to announce steps to battle an invasive species that could threaten Texas livestock. That invasive pest has been spreading north through Mexico.
For nearly 30 years, the U.S. fought one of the strangest battles ever, dropping millions of deadly flies onto fire ant colonies. Billions of dollars were spent. Helicopters and drones filled the skies. And secret labs bred swarms of flies that could decapitate ants and turn them into zombie-like shells. A brand new $8.12 million facility in South Texas is now releasing sterile flies to step up the mission. The goal was simple: wipe out the fire ants that had spread across America. But the outcome? That part was anything but simple. What happened next didn't just catch scientists off guard, it stunned them. The flies did exactly what they were supposed to. But the ants had a twist no one saw coming, one that flipped everything we thought we knew about battling nature. The invasion started quietly. No one saw it coming. In the 1930s, cargo ships from South America carried tiny stowaways that would launch the biggest biological invasion in U.S. history. Fire ants arrived in Mobile, Alabama, crawling off ships and onto American soil without a trace. And for them, it was paradise. America had everything: endless food, warm weather, and most importantly, no natural predators. Back in South America, they constantly fought to survive. Birds, insects, and other animals kept their numbers in check. But here, nothing stood in their way. They spread fast. Fire ants aren't like the ones you see at picnics. These are aggressive, organized attackers. When they bite, it feels like hot needles injecting venom into your skin, earning them the name fire ants. In just a few years, they began to conquer the American South. Massive underground colonies popped up in fields, backyards, parks, even golf courses. Each colony had hundreds of thousands of ants, ready to swarm anything that came close. But things turned deadly when they started killing livestock. They'd attack newborn calves, targeting soft spots like the eyes. The calves died from sheer numbers and pain. Farmers stood helpless, watching thousands of dollars in cattle wiped out by insects. These ants weren't just a problem anymore. They were a real threat, and their rise was about to spark one of the oddest military-style missions ever. Scientists had been tracking them closely, coming up with a strange plan. The government was getting ready to fight fire ants with flies. Millions of specially bred killer flies, released in what would become one of the weirdest biological battles ever. The ants seemed unstoppable, but nature was about to strike back. By the 1990s, fire ants had become one of America's biggest nightmares. They weren't just annoying anymore, they were causing billions in damages every year. These ants had taken over 346 million acres of U.S. land. In some places, you could find as many as 60 nests in a single yard. Each one was like an underground fortress, packed with hundreds of thousands of ants, moving in perfect sync. The stories coming out of the South were getting worse by the day. People were being bitten, crops were being destroyed, livestock was dying, and farmers were doing everything they could, most of it useless. Regular sprays didn't work. The nests were too deep. The colonies had multiple queens, and even flooding didn't stop them. When farmers tried, the ants simply locked themselves together, jaws and legs, to form floating rafts and drift to safety. Scientists knew they had to try something new. They'd already used poison, traps, even fire. But nothing worked for long. The ants just kept coming back, stronger every time. That's when researchers started thinking outside the box. They began digging into what kept fire ants under control back in South America. What they found was so strange, it almost didn't seem real, like something straight out of a horror movie. The answer? Flies. Not just any flies, but a certain kind that did something wild. They turned fire ants into zombie-like shells and then chopped their heads clean off. These flies had been fighting fire ants for millions of years, evolving right alongside them. They were nature's built-in enemy. But bringing them to the U.S. would be the biggest bug experiment ever attempted. Scientists would have to breed millions of them and drop them from planes right onto fire ant nests. It sounded wild, but after 30 years of losing ground to fire ants, wild might be exactly what was needed. Deep in the South American rainforest lives one of the creepiest little killers in nature. They're called phorid flies, but scientists gave them a much scarier nickname, decapitating flies. These parasites have been locked in battle with fire ants for ages, and over time, evolution turned them into shockingly effective assassins. They belong to a massive insect family with over 4,000 species, but only about 70 are known as true ant decapitators. Here's how they pull it off. After mating, a female fly starts hunting for fire ants, zeroing in like a heat-seeking missile. When she spots one, she strikes in less than a second, jabbing a sharp needle-like tube into the ant's body and laying a single egg. The ant doesn't even flinch. It just goes on with its day, hauling food, digging tunnels, and caring for the colony, completely unaware that something terrifying has started growing inside. Within 24 hours, that egg hatches into a hungry little larva. At first, it drinks the ant's blood-like fluid, called hemolymph. The ant still acts totally normal. It works, walks, and blends right in with the rest, but the larva inside is getting bolder. Over the next few days, it crawls upward through the body until it reaches the head. That's when things turn disturbing. Once in the brain, it begins eating the ant's brain tissue and jaw muscles. The ant is still alive, still moving, but its mind is basically gone. It keeps doing its usual tasks, but it's not really in control anymore. The fly larva is now running the show, like a little puppeteer inside the ant's head. And nobody in the colony can tell. The ant looks the same, acts the same, but it's already lost. As the larva keeps feeding, there's only one gruesome step left. It releases chemicals that dissolve the tissue connecting the ant's head to its body. Then, with a faint pop, the head falls off. Inside that severed head, hidden away from danger, the larva finishes transforming. In just a few days, it becomes a fully grown fly, ready to rise from the ant's skull and do it all over again. What's even creepier? These flies only go after fire ants. They completely ignore other ant species and won't touch any other insect or animal. It's like they have a built-in radar, perfectly tuned to one enemy, the fire ant. Scientists were amazed. This wasn't just any insect. This was the perfect weapon, something nature had been quietly refining for millions of years. But finding the flies was just the start. If the U.S. wanted to use them on a massive scale, field tests wouldn't be enough. They'd need something far bigger. That's where the secret lab came in. Tucked away in Gainesville, Florida, sits one of the strangest scientific labs in the country. From the outside, the building looks like any other quiet government facility. But inside, something totally unexpected is going on. Scientists are running what might be the strangest military-style mission in history, breeding an army of killer flies to take down fire ants. This isn't some backyard experiment, it's a full-scale operation. The lab produces thousands of decapitating flies every single day. Run by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, this fly factory has been steadily building up its insect forces since 1997. Walking through its doors feels like stepping into another world. The walls are lined with rows of controlled boxes, each one set to just the right temperature and humidity. And inside, nature's weirdest battle is playing out around the clock. The scientists have built a perfect hunting ground for their flies. Fire ants live in specially designed trays, each with upside-down cups inside. Every 10 minutes, those cups automatically shift positions, forcing the ants to move their babies over and over again. That constant stress sends the colony into chaos. The ants release alarm pheromones, chemical signals that warn others of danger. But those same signals are exactly what draws the flies in, The stronger the smell, the faster the flies show up. Each morning, fresh flies are released into attack chambers. They get about 3 or 4 days to hunt and lay their eggs inside as many fire ants as they can. Then, any ants that survive are cleared out, and a new batch comes in. It's a non-stop cycle. The ants panic, release more signals, attract more flies, and the process repeats. Every week, the lab produces thousands of parasite-infected ants ready to be studied. When it's time to ship out these tiny soldiers, the process becomes even more fascinating. Scientists guide the flies toward bright lights that lead them into small collection traps. From there, they're gently packed into clear plastic tubes, each one about the size of a pencil. Inside each tube are 300 to 400 flies, enough to wipe out at least 10 fire ant colonies. The tubes are packed with just the right amount of moisture, not too dry, but not so wet that it causes dangerous condensation. These fly-filled tubes are carefully loaded into portable coolers, then driven out to the front lines of America's weirdest biological war. The program started small, producing just 1,500 flies a day. But after years of refining the process, the lab can now supply enough flies to attack colonies in multiple states. What began as a small experiment has grown into a nationwide defense strategy. Millions of flies ready to be deployed at any time. When it's time for a real-world release, everything kicks into high gear. The launch of these fly attacks looks like something out of an action movie. Teams of scientists head out to known fire ant hotspots, coolers in hand, packed with flies. The first phase is what they call colony disruption. Researchers physically dig into fire ant mounds, kicking, slicing, and turning the soil upside down. They destroy the ants' carefully built tunnels, tossing dirt in every direction. And once that happens, chaos explodes. The ants pour out like an angry, moving tide. They're in full defense mode, biting anything that moves. Worker ants scramble around frantically, trying to save their young and rebuild what's left. The air fills with their alarm signals. Those same pheromones that once helped them survive are now being used against them. And this is the moment the scientists have been waiting for. Those alarm pheromones work like a giant signal flare for the decapitating flies. They can smell the panic from far off, and it sends them into a full-blown hunting frenzy. This is the moment everyone's been waiting for. Scientists pop open the plastic tubes and release hundreds of flies all at once. For smaller colonies, they might only need a few dozen. But in larger-scale missions, they'll unleash anywhere from 2,000 to 20,000 flies in a single attack. The flies shoot into the air like tiny fighter jets, breaking into swarms and diving straight toward the chaos below. Each one picks out a target and dives in. Within seconds, hundreds of ants are injected with fly eggs. But the mission doesn't stop there. Scientists know one attack isn't enough to take down a well-built fire ant colony. These battles turn into full-blown sieges, lasting anywhere from 2 to 4 weeks, with fresh waves of flies sent in over and over again. Sometimes researchers take things even further with a sneakier plan. They capture fire ants, infect them with fly larvae back at the lab, and then quietly release them back into their own nests. These Trojan horse ants carry the parasite straight into the center of the colony, spreading death from the inside. It's a slow and silent invasion. The whole strategy takes extreme timing and precision. Scientists have to make sure the weather is just right, that the flies are healthy, and that everything lines up for a successful release. A single mistake, wrong timing, bad wind, or sick flies can ruin the entire operation. So they plan like military teams. They track which colonies were hit, when the next wave should launch, and how each batch of flies performed. They keep detailed notes on every release. After decades of trial and error, the team has turned this strange form of warfare into a finely tuned system. They've learned how to trigger panic, how to time their fly drops perfectly, and how to keep the pressure up until the colony gives in. But what happened next wasn't just about killing ants. Something far stranger started happening. something even the experts didn't expect. The real shock came not from the number of ants that died, but how the survivors began to behave. After years of launching millions of flies onto fire ant colonies, researchers expected to see total collapse. Instead, they saw something they couldn't explain. The ants were changing. Colonies that used to swarm without fear suddenly froze up. Workers started abandoning food at the first sign of trouble. Foraging stopped cold the moment flies were nearby. The flies weren't just attacking individual ants, they were changing how entire colonies acted. Ants that used to charge anything in their way were now skittish, backing off, or fleeing. The simple threat of a fly in the area was enough to bring a whole colony to a standstill. Then came another surprise. A researcher with the U.S. Department of Agriculture made a discovery that changed everything. In places where decapitating flies had been released years earlier, there was still a 90% chance of finding them. The flies hadn't just survived, they were thriving, and more than that, they were spreading. Even in areas where they hadn't been released, new populations of flies were turning up. These tiny hunters had built a life for themselves in the U.S., expanding their range without any human help. They had found a way to fit into the American environment on their own. What scientists feared at the start, that these South American flies might not last in the U.S., turned out to be wrong. Not only did the flies survive, they adapted beautifully. America had a new permanent resident, and it was nature's own fire ant killer. By 2008, the flies had spread across about half of all areas where fire ants lived. By 2011, some species had reached nearly 90% of fire ant territory. The change in fire ant behavior was massive. Scientists measured a 10 to 15% drop in worker ant populations in places where the flies had taken hold. And in ant colonies, that's a huge shift. Fewer workers meant less food gathered, slower growth, and weaker defenses against other threats. What surprised scientists most was how well the psychological impact worked. The flies weren't just killing ants, they were scaring them into completely changing how they lived. These once fearless invaders were now acting like cautious survivors. The plan to drop millions of flies had worked. It was smart, strange, and surprisingly effective. But the question still hung in the air. Was it enough? The war was about to expand. While the fly program was getting real results, it wasn't wiping fire ants out entirely. Scientists knew they needed more tools, so they took the battle to the next level. Soon, helicopters started showing up over fire ant zones, but they weren't dropping bombs or supplies. They were carrying something deadlier to ants. Bait? These little pellets looked like pieces of mulch, but to fire ants they smelled like food they couldn't resist. Ants grabbed the bait and carried it back home, not knowing they were spreading poison inside their own colonies. About 80% of this bait was dropped by helicopter into areas too remote for ground teams. The poison itself wasn't strong enough to hurt mammals unless they ate more than their body weight. But for ants, even a tiny bit was deadly. Speed was key. As soon as a new colony was found, teams rushed in to stop it before it could spread. They'd create a 3-mile buffer zone around the area because fire ants can travel that far fast if no one stops them. Still, helicopters were expensive. So scientists began testing something faster and cheaper: drones. These small, unmanned aircraft could do the same job, cover large areas, drop bait with precision, but at a fraction of the cost. Even better, drones could fly into places that were too rough, too risky, or too remote for helicopters. But the ground battle was just as important, and it brought in one of the most unexpected allies: dogs. Not just any dogs, specially trained ones. These sniffer dogs were taught to smell out fire ant colonies from up to 164 feet away. Their noses were so sharp they could find nests that humans would never spot. Working with their handlers, these dogs became some of the most reliable fire ant hunters in the entire operation. After an area had been treated, they were often the final check to make sure the ants were really gone for good. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, Australia was watching all of this closely. As an island nation, they couldn't afford to let fire ants gain a foothold. They saw what happened in the U.S., and they knew they'd have to use every tool available if they wanted to stop the same invasion from happening on their soil. Australia didn't just watch, they acted. They adopted many of the same tools America used, blending flies, poison bait, helicopters, drones, and sniffer dogs into their own nationwide fire ant eradication plan. What started as an odd idea, dropping flies out of airplanes, had grown into the most advanced biological control effort in history. It was no longer just about bugs. It was science, technology, and strategy, all working together in a global campaign against one of the world's most aggressive invaders. From the U.S. to Australia, it seemed like a model of what science could do when pushed to its limits. But underneath the progress was a quiet truth no one wanted to admit. For all the tech, all the effort, all the tools, the ants were still here. And the results were about to show something no one expected. The ultimate revelation. After 30 years of attacking fire ants with everything scientists had, millions of flies, cutting-edge tech, full-on coordination, the most shocking thing wasn't how much had been accomplished. It was what fire ants managed to survive. The big jaw-dropping moment came when experts realized something they never thought they'd say. Fire ants had actually won. Even with all the pressure from flies, poison, drones, and dogs, fire ants now controlled 346 million acres of land in the U.S., more than they did before the program started. On every 2.5 acres of infested land, there could be up to 60 fire ant nests, each swarming with hundreds of thousands of workers. How did this happen? The flies did exactly what they were designed to do. They built long-lasting populations, spread across the fire ants' territory, and successfully infected millions of ants. On paper, the science worked. The flies made ants less aggressive, cut worker numbers by 10 to 15%, and helped native insects get a better shot at survival. On top of that, helicopters and drones dropped bait, dogs sniffed out nests, and researchers threw everything they had at the problem. And yet, somehow, the ants were still winning. What caught scientists off guard was how fast the ants learned. They figured out how to avoid fly attacks by changing when and where they searched for food. Some colonies even adapted their behavior to make it harder for flies to land and lay eggs. But even those clever defenses weren't the ants' biggest strength. Their true weapon was something no lab could stop: mass reproduction. Multiple times a year, millions of queen ants leave their nests and fly off to start new ones. Each queen can form a new colony, and within months, it can grow into another massive underground empire. Even if the flies wiped out 15% of the workers, the remaining ants could bounce back quickly. One nest gone, 10 more were already on the rise. It was a battle that science just couldn't win fast enough. One of the lead researchers behind the fly program put it simply: if fire ants ever truly disappeared, the flies would go with them. But after 3 decades of fighting, that's not what happened. Instead, fire ants dug in. They made it through hurricanes, droughts, floods, and even one of the most advanced pest control programs ever created. In the end, the ants proved a hard truth. Sometimes, it's not the biggest weapons that win. It's the side that just never stops. Today, the fire ants keep spreading, and the flies keep chasing them. The war that was supposed to end in victory has turned into something else entirely: a permanent standoff. And now, both species are part of America's ecosystem for good. What about you? What do you think about using nature to fight nature? Have you ever had to deal with fire ants in your own backyard? Let us know in the comments, and if you found this story as surprising as we did, be sure to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who'd find it just as fascinating. Thanks for watching. Until next time.